Let me now introduce our guest. Nick Zornes has been an environmental planner with the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality, helping build water infrastructure across the state. Then planner for the city of Dana Point, California, a planner for the city of Encinitas, where he's part of a team that obtained the city's first certified housing element in over 2 decades, overcoming several land use challenges and regulatory barriers. Most recently, he was planning manager for Riverside County. Prior to his work in the public sector, Nick worked as a planning consultant and within the construction industry as a project manager. Nick holds a master's degree in community development from the University of Nebraska and a bachelor's degree in urban planning and sustainability from Arizona State University. Anthony Carnesecca, assistant to the city manager, has worked in local government for over 10 years at the city of San Jose, then the city of Santa Clara, and currently at the city of Los Altos. During his time at Los Altos, Anthony has served as liaison for Los Altos businesses to guide them through city regulatory processes, researched and analyzed administrative and operational policies, programs, and projects, drafted agenda reports to present to City Council, and provided outreach to a number of external organizations on behalf of the city. I'm very pleased to welcome both Nick Zornes and Anthony Carnesecca this morning. Thank you both very much for spending time with us today on this important topic. I understand you'll begin with the presentation, and I'll turn it over to you, I think, Anthony.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I know my bio makes me sound really exciting with policy, staff reports, liaisoning, but I promise if you know me, I'm a fun guy, happy. So I'm happy to be here today, and I'm going to share my screen. I do have a presentation for the group, and we're going to go through that. All right, so for the topic this morning, imagine a park on Parking Plaza 1. A little bit of the background. City Council did direct staff to evaluate the potential for at-grade park space with parking located underground as a priority for 2024. So looking at our downtown was really the first step of this process, where we're evaluating what potential options we have. And so here's the landscape of all 10 of our parking plazas. If you didn't know, these are the official, unofficial names of the parking plazas in downtown. They're numbered 1 through 10, with number 1 at the southwest corner across from Bluestone Lane, and then plaza number 10 is across from or from the park there on the northeast section, just behind 4 Main. And so when we're looking at downtown, there's a number of different options that we took when we were looking at the potential locations. Parking plazas 1 and 2 are both rectangular acre lots that are pretty standard in shape and size, and their location would lend itself well. Parking Plaza 3, we're looking at a irregular shaped parking plaza, which if you can see, if you know, the downtown runs from Enchante at the very top across from the main library all the way down to Los Altos Grill. And so when you're looking at this parking plaza, it's a little uniquely shaped and may present some challenges for a potential park and especially for underground parking. Parking plazas 4, 5, and 6. As you can see, each of these plazas does have uniquely shaped buildings that kind of intersect into the parking plaza at different locations. These locations could be an ideal location for Paseo park space, but when we're talking about underground parking, it's definitely challenging to identify how you could make sure that the ROI is there for the investment to pay for underground parking, especially as you start talking about different angles and directions and how you angle the parking appropriately. So 4, 5, and 6 presented some unique challenges. And then the north parking plazas, I kind of lumped them together. 7 and 8 are roughly earmarked for some other purposes. Number 9 is partially owned by the city and partially privately owned. So that wouldn't be a potential option for the city owned. And then parking plaza number 10 is a little cut off in this image, but is definitely an angular parking plaza that is actually adjacent to another park across the street. And so city staff didn't feel with the irregular shape and its adjacency to a park that had already exists that it would make the most sense. So in this very preliminary plan, which I want to be clear is a very preliminary plan that needs to go to city council for discussion, city staff has looked at what the potential options would be. And parking plazas 1 and 2 really present the best option in staff's opinion because they provide a standard shaped sized parking lot that could be undergrounded for parking with ease. And then they would provide a decent amount of space for a park plaza space. And then on top of that, this half of parking plaza number 2 is potentially spoken for in a non-binding MOU with the downtown theater group to explore the possibility of a downtown theater. And so with all of those factors kind of integrated together, parking plaza 1 and 2 could present a good option for a combination space that would allow a park and plaza within the downtown, and then would allow it to feed into the community aspects. And especially at the end of parking plaza 1 in the bottom left could feed into Bluestone Lane and across the street. So I'm going to go over the existing conditions of both of these plazas just so we all understand what's there, what currently exists, and what it could look like moving forward. So the existing conditions, as you can see, we have a number of trees and parking stalls in the location. And they do both have alleyways that run behind the buildings, which you'll see in the drawings. These parking plazas are currently in good condition for the most part, but we could use some work on them, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So our parking stalls, we have 263 parking stalls in both the plazas, 131 in Plaza 1, 132 in Plaza 2, with a total of 10 ADA stalls. Moving forward in the plan, the city would look to replace at least all of this parking and presumably could add more parking with a second level of underground parking. And when we're talking about the project, I'll talk about a little bit later, the parking lot could go underground across from First Street all the way to Third Street. So you could gain parking in the middle there underneath Second Street. And there's no bicycle parking in either plaza at this point. So when we're talking about current conditions, it is a good idea to look at the parking stalls. When we are looking at these parking stalls, a lot of this asphalt hasn't been touched in a number of years. When I say they're in good condition, they're in good condition that they're drivable, but they could definitely use some attention, which could be done with this project. So with this project, we are looking to improve the parking conditions as well as provide a park space for the downtown. And so when we're looking at these, especially ADA stalls, we could provide increased and improved ADA stalls within the new proposal in the underground parking that would make it easier for those with accessibility needs to access downtown and especially access this new park space. Overhead utilities. I put together this little graph. I went out man on the street in the parking plazas and took an inventory of what we have existing. We have the overhead lines that run across the trees nearest to the businesses on Main Street with a number of poles and lights. These locations are pretty much on point. You can see that the overhead lines run all the way down the alleys. They don't run down Second Street. But this presents a unique opportunity where we could increase the lighting within this park space because right now the lighting is not probably adequate for the amount of parking that's there. The overhead utilities. As we look at this project, we are discussing the possibility with this park of undergrounding the utilities. So when we are looking at what improvements could be made to this park space, we would love to be able to underground these utilities that currently exist above grade to increase the vibrancy, beauty of our downtown, while also making it safer for the community with those lines underground. So right now you see the picture on the left is just behind the post. where they have a couple different poles, one of which is just for lighting. And then on the right, you can see that that is the background of the mural that was done by Altos, and you can see the liquor store there. This power line is actually running through a number of trees, as you can see in the picture. They run through that farther tree in the background, and then it pretty much exists within this tree, and the tree is currently growing through the lines. And so from a safety perspective, we do see the value of undergrounding the utilities moving forward, not only from an aesthetics point of view, but a safety perspective for all of the community, and hopefully for electric resiliency for all of our businesses. Our trash receptacles. As you know, if you've parked in one of our parking plazas, we do have the blue dumpsters, which are for recyclables in our downtown. Under this current proposal, we are looking to evaluate how we could better store our trash receptacles for the common use of the businesses. So they could be in a centralized location within each of the plazas, and they wouldn't necessarily be adjacent to vehicles, which, as you can see in the picture on the right, this is from parking plaza number 2. That dumpster effectively is facing whatever vehicles are parked in those parking stalls. And so city staff has been in contact with Mission Trails about what the requirements would be and how we could move these trash receptacles into a centralized location. Landscaping. One of the components looking at this is that we do have existing trees. As you can see, the tree on the left, the trees are in varying conditions. Some of these trees definitely could use some improvement. And so looking forward at this park, we are seeing that this could be an opportunity for us to really improve the landscaping and beautify the downtown. And then, as I mentioned in the picture on the right, this is a better view where you can see that the tree is actually growing through the power lines. And so from the perspective of landscaping and ease of maintenance, this presents unique problems, especially for our maintenance crews to maintain these trees. And then here you can see signage. I know that one of the most important things when looking at parking from that perspective is making sure that there's adequate and beneficial signage throughout the downtown. These are the two plaza parking signs on Plaza 1 and 2. The picture on the left is right across from the post. And then the picture number 2 is right across from Rustic House. You can see it in the background. Both of these signs are inadequate for the parking that is available there. As you can see from the one on the left, the fire hydrant and the tree would pretty much block anyone from seeing it if they're coming from First Street from the new developments that have been added. And then from the picture on the right, you can see that the juniper bushes have overgrown these signs. Not to mention it is a pretty small text. And so moving forward, one of the things that we'd like to look at improving is making sure that we have good, adequate signage to direct folks to the appropriate parking locations. So when we look at this park and parking plaza underneath ground, this would be through good signage throughout the downtown that directs visitors, residents, and business owners to the appropriate parking locations. And this is the existing conditions map. So I do want to let everyone know we are having a rendering done of the park. We don't have the rendering at this point in time, but we do have an aerial projection of what the park could look like. So for today's conversation, we'll have that. And then by the time we present to City Council, we will have the rendering ready to share with Council and the community. So the existing conditions from before, you can see that these are the standard parking plazas. And then this is the proposed park space. And so you can imagine the difference between the two different existing conditions in proposed park, where we have at-grade parking with vehicles that is visible to pedestrians, visitors, anyone coming downtown, would now be replaced with a beautiful park space that creates a meandering space, paseo, green space. And then you can see these buildings that I'll touch on in a second. An important aspect that I did want to note is that you can see we have retained the alleyway space on both sides. So we still have the alleyway for fire access as well as delivery access. And so this could be a multimodal paseo space that could be used for pedestrians when necessary, but then remain for delivery vehicles moving forward. and emergency vehicles. So the design features, I know that graphic, it's a little hard to identify exactly what everything is. So we did put together this design feature that lists out specifically all the different features of the park itself. Number one, we did want to create a central green with sloped sides for seating. We didn't want this space to be entirely for just events. We wanted to make sure that there were potential spaces where it could be activated into it, but we also wanted to make sure that it was a park space. And so number two, a small play area for children, and then a central paved area and pedestrian connection that can allow folks who are meandering through the park to sit down, spend time, have lunch, gather together within this new park space. Number four, you can see a number of trees. We are looking to add these beautiful trees and make sure that we maintain them within the new park space. Number five, the amenity buildings. As I mentioned before, these would be the elevators from the parking garage below grade. We would ideally, and this was one of the components that we wanted to make sure we included, was public restrooms. One of the items from the downtown vision and from hearing from businesses is that we don't have any publicly available restrooms within the downtown. And so this would provide a public restroom space that folks could direct individuals who are in downtown for special events or just visiting to use those. And then, as I mentioned, trash collection. These sized dumpster enclosures have been spoken, or I have spoken with Mission Trails, and these would meet their needs and the needs of the community for both the dumpster size and for trash vehicles coming to pick up the dumpsters. And so this would really beautify our parking plazas and move the dumpsters into a trash enclosure moving forward. And then number six, there's the plaza, which we did not render the downtown theater, but you can imagine that this is half of Plaza 2. And so the downtown theater would be right here with this plaza space that would have seating, be able to be activated and move forward. Number seven, this is the ramp to the underground parking. Staff is envisioning that there would be a ramp coming off of First Street, and then there would also be a ramp off Third Street. So the entirety of the parking plazas, including under the downtown theater, would be parking space. So the entire section would be parking. We'd gain the parking stalls that exist that do not exist today under the sidewalk and under Second Street. And then if we added a second level of underground parking, depending on cost, we would be able to gain that second level and double our parking spaces ideally. Number eight, this is a raised crosswalk across Second Street that would connect the two park and plaza spaces. Staff is envisioning that we could create temporary bollard holes along this raised crosswalk. So if community groups, the community coalition, any other groups within community events, we could have these holes and have bollards that we could put into place. So the community event, or if the community or city wanted to host downtown concert series, downtown movie series, potential options, you could activate both of these spaces into a very large community area while also being able to use it on a daily basis as a park. And then, as I mentioned, the slow streets for multimodal use and servicing. One thing we do want to recognize is the importance that the businesses have to access their fronted or their backs of their buildings. So this would remain as a potential access point, but we would redo it so it would be a beautiful paseo space. One important unique design element that I didn't touch on, and I want to make sure I really emphasize, is that if we do this park plaza space within plazas 1 and 2, all of these buildings that exist here along Main Street on from First to Third would be able to have a new frontage. So they would be able to have a new frontage onto this park space and adjacent to the parking that would be available underground. And so all of these businesses would be able to have this new frontage and encourage visitors, residents to come into their business from the park, and they could find unique ways to utilize this frontage facing onto the park. So this is the main design feature that we have before us. Like I said, the city is having a rendering done, and we should have that available in time for city council. but we don't have that today. But we do have these design features that have all the elements that we're talking about within this park. And so next steps. City Council is going to review this at a study session on April 9th. This is the first time that City Council will be seeing this proposal and discussing with staff. This has all been preliminary up to this point to understand what is the current condition for downtown, what is the best parking plaza that could be available for a park space with underground parking. City staff is planning, if City Council gives the direction, to continue community outreach through the spring and summer. We already have a number of ideas and concepts that we'd like to do in order to get that outreach, make sure that folks are aware of what we're discussing. And then finally, we think it's beneficial to do a feasibility study or preliminary design documentation. So what you have before you here is really, in essence, a very conceptual design that would need to be identified what the cost would look like for this type of park and underground parking, which would be done through a feasibility study. So city staff would be able to have the feasibility study completed, and then we would be able to return to city council after we've done community outreach, a feasibility study, and what the community is saying of what they would like to see within the park space. The one thing that city staff does recognize is when you propose a park on parking plazas 1 and 2, that's very tough to conceptualize. I have a hard time conceptualizing it because I know that everybody in this room probably has a different thought and opinion on what a park would look like. So what staff wanted to do with this design and this conceptual design is just create a starting point. This is a starting point for conversation. It's something to draw folks in. Our rendering will continue to show engagement and give folks the opportunity to envision what it could look like when you go from effectively at grade parking, that's pretty much for vehicles, dumpsters, overhead electric lines, to a beautiful park space where we would still be able to provide the electricity underground, our parking underground, and we would be moving a lot of that um, a lot of that parked cars and a lot of the visible things that are at grade right now below ground. And then we would have a beautiful park space. So folks coming into town would have a new space that they could use moving forward. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to leave any slides up, David, whatever you think would work best for conversation.
Anthony, thanks very much for the detailed presentation of the proposed project. I think it would make sense to possibly leave the slides up so that we could, you could reference them in your responses to the questions. So let's proceed from there. I have questions for you first, and then, as I had said, I'll open it up to the audience. How long approximately will this project take to complete once it's begun?
I think city staff doesn't have an exact timeline yet. I think as we go into the feasibility study, that's where we'll really kind of identify the specific issues, especially utility, existing sewer lines, which we know run underneath the plaza, cable lines, all of these things that are going to be at play. So once we are able to do the feasibility study, we'll have a better idea of what that timeline would look like for construction.
Thanks. How many parking spaces in plazas 1 and 2 will be removed during the project, and where will people park while the project is underway?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the key components of this is how we could identify the phasing of the project. So, as we're looking at the project in the conceptual drawings to the eventual construction documents, identifying how we could do it in a way that's phased and appropriate. So, we're not taking everything offline potentially. But if we do need to do that, there's a number of solutions. I know the city of Mountain View, when they do parking improvements, they have a valet service or shuttle service that's available just for those times when they're doing the construction. And so there's a number of potential short-term solutions the city could enact while doing construction in order to make sure that we're not offlining all of this parking at the same time, or at least we're able to offset some of the parking that is available elsewhere through these methods.
That sounds good. I know it's very early, but is there any a range of cost of the total project cost?
That's the tricky one. I don't want to go on the record with any potential cost just because we don't know what the feasibility study would look like, and especially depending on the design elements in the final design of the park. I do know that we are looking at a very expensive project. I would assume in the two-figure million would probably be my guess at minimum. I don't know if Director Zornes has a better estimate.
So I'll go ahead and jump in here. So the numbers for underground parking have always kind of been a high cost, regardless, and that's because the construction method means that it's going to always be a construction podium style construction, which is it is costly. We know that from the history of building underground parking elsewhere. It does range depending on the market conditions, but then also obviously area that you're doing it. Right now, the conservative number that I would use is it's about $80,000 a parking stall to replace. So if you're looking at 100 parking stalls to replace for underground, you're looking at about an $8 million parking garage. And that's just the raw rough numbers. Again, conservative though as well. So if that's the kind of number that we're talking about now, the park build out for the actual improvements of the active and passive park kind of amenities for the above grade, that's a little bit different in regards to the numbers, and it's obviously not that high just because the construction isn't obviously as intense.
Thanks, Nick. And that leads into, it also might be a little early for this, but how will the project be paid for?
So I could go in and jump in here. The community, some people have already heard me kind of somewhat talk about this, and it's I think a really great idea. While Anthony was actually giving his presentation, I actually ran some numbers between 6 projects that have already been built and paid into the Park and Lieu Fund, which leads me to say where and how we would pay for this. As many of the people on this call have lived in Los Altos for several years, there's not really much land left to acquire for parkland acquisition, or at least large parcels. Parking Plaza 1 in itself is just under 1 acre of land. 1 acre of land in Los Altos, land value is approximately $12 million. So if we were to acquire a raw piece of land, just brand new on the market, we'd be looking to spend $12 million. So that's quite high, obviously. But we already own parking plazas in Parking Plaza 1, and so we already have the land to acquire. But in order to be able to transform above grade surface level parking, we could use Park and Lieu money to drop that parking underground, which then would provide the nexus is that we now have developable land for parkland. And since we're at the point where you don't really have anything left to acquire easily and readily available, this would be a good use of those funds. As I mentioned when I first started talking, is when I ran the numbers between 6 of the projects that are either fully completed and have been, or are nearing end of construction right now, as we have 3 projects on First Street, all getting certificates of occupancy this month. Between those 6 projects, the city has brought in $7.2 million in Park and Lieu funds. So as I mentioned, is that a parking garage, essentially on Parking Plaza number 1, we could probably roughly estimate an underground structure would cost us about $8 million. Obviously, there's some contingency would be needed to factor into that, but with the money that I just calculated from just 6 of the projects that have been done in Los Altos, we would very easily be able to afford to pay for that. As a lot of folks know also is we have planned for a lot of new housing units in downtown Los Altos in our other documents, which is the housing element predominantly. So we do know that we are going to see more development in downtown Los Altos. And so the nexus of being able to use park and loom money for this is kind of a 2-in-1, because we're not going to really be able to acquire a big standalone parcel such as this that isn't zoned for residential uses. And that's the hard part, is that we can't continue to keep on buying residential parcels without doing other things that are triggering other laws and everything. So this is actually a really good ability to use what we have and what we will have come in further.
Thanks, Nick. One corollary to that is where do the funds that are paid in by the Los Altos Grill annually for their adjacent parking, where do they go? Are they part of the parking in lieu fund?
They do go, it's not the parking in lieu. So what I was talking about, so that's, I just want to make sure I'm clear, is that we have a park in lieu, which is what we refer to as like PIL. And those are under the Quimby Act is how we're able to exact those dollars. That lives in one fund in and of itself. The parking in lieu fund, which you're referencing, David, from the grill, where we do take in annual payments for the use of the parking plaza that's immediately adjacent to them. That does live in the separate fund. That one goes into now the downtown parking or downtown improvement fund.
Great, thanks for the clarification. If you have, moving on to something completely different, if you have a grass lawn and irrigation, what would happen during droughts?
I think to that point, we would identify what it exactly would look like and what the specific benefit or specific materials we would want to use would be. I think obviously we are sensitive to the fact that we are in a drought community that is impacted by droughts on a regular basis. And so moving forward, we would want to make sure that we balance having a good community space with the materials, but also being aware that that is a consideration moving forward.
Thanks. I've noticed the Hillview Dog Park can get pretty worn. How much wear and tear of the lawn? Yeah, I know it's again very early. But how much wear and tear of the lawn of the project is likely to be, and how will that be addressed?
I think the use of this space compared to a dog park would be a little different. I do know that Hillview, you've got, potentially greyhounds running laps back and forth down that park space. And we would see a number of foot traffic here, but I don't imagine that we would have the same wear and tear. Obviously, a lot of these, as with all parks, as with all iterations of projects, if we install something and city staff notes that there are issues, we can always come up with a good solution. We're happy to adjust as necessary moving forward. If and when the time comes that the installation goes into place and we learn that something necessarily isn't working, we're always happy to adjust based upon the community need.
And I will just jump in here and say is, so when we did this particular kind of very obviously preliminary to kind of somewhat help orient the community on what we could do in regards to a type of a layout or configuration of a passive or active park. Again, very iterative, and this isn't necessarily exactly what it needs to be, has to be, will be even. It will, all be kind of subject to what the community really kind of does in the community engagement component, which will be subsequent to this. Obviously, specifically, as I know we have members of the community on the call that are aware, is when we do parks, unless it's, a very micro park, I wouldn't even say it's a pocket park, but when we do like micro parks, you kind of don't have to really have a park landscape designer involved because it's so small. But when you again have an acre worth of land and it's going to be cross-functionally used, we will actually definitely need to have someone that specializes in the field of park development in order to be able to kind of address some of the comments that David just made. Because we do obviously want to make sure that it doesn't just end up start degrading, within a month or two after build out, and obviously make sure that it's successful and that maintenance doesn't become some of a hindrance or liability to the city or the patrons of it. And so we definitely obviously would take that fully into account, and that's something that would kind of go through the feasibility and also just that outreach of what we can do and how we can do it. I will say the benefit is our special projects manager that works for the city now is actually a licensed landscape architect. And so we have a lot of in-house expertise. I also have a landscape architect that is one of the city planners that works in my department. So we do actually have a lot of good in-house expertise in some of these. So some of it won't even be just let's spend a lot of money with consultants, but rather let's talk internally first and kind of vet out some of those ideas, and we'll be able to kind of create the best possible use of this space with what the community wants.
That sounds great. Nick, any closing thoughts or remarks?
No, other than I just really want to kind of, anybody that's on the call, to really kind of help orient this, from Anthony's really great presentation and overview of what we have before us. And what we can get to is that all of this is iterative in the process. This is definitely very early on. Again, I don't want anybody to kind of take this as, oh, look at this is what the city's going to do specifically. This was just a thought of what we can do in order to be able to best utilize a lot of the space that we do have, and still keeping parking that is much needed and desired in our downtown area. I will say we are very well aware of the utilities that run beneath these lots as well as above, which Anthony did say. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that we are very well aware of that. That was something that we specifically discussed before we even started working with anybody on some initial rendering. So obviously those are still a lot of things that need to be vetted out. But the beautiful thing is because we would be the developers of this park and also parking garage, is we set the tone and the pace of the phasing. So I know that's one of the really big concerns or questions of people in the community is, well, how is this going to impact when we're doing other development? Obviously, we control, the go button of when we actually start the project, and also the performance metrics and requirements that we're going to have with whoever we select as a potential contractor for us in the future. So I do want to make sure that we all kind of somewhat know that, and at least hold on to that as a part of it, is that we could do the design and then say, hey, we need to sit on this for another year before we want to start it because we have other projects going on right nearby that is already impacting our parking, and we can't do it all at once. That would be too disruptive. And so that's how a lot of the cities have done this. I would say also something just some people have asked is, well, who else has done stuff like this? Me and Anthony have talked pretty intensively. The city of Sunnyvale actually did this about almost 10 years ago, right off of Murphy. And then also Burlingame is currently doing something very similar to this. And then also even towns like Davis up a little bit more north of us, is a lot of folks are actually doing this and reinventing kind of what they already have with some of these amenities that everyone's been looking to kind of deploy. So we have a lot of those kind of components floating around in the back end of everything. And so I just want to make sure that we kind of all know that those are kind of things that are constantly being discussed while we're going through this iterative process.
Thanks, thanks, Nick. Anthony, any closing thoughts?
Nick hit a lot of the nails on the head. I'll just go ahead and say 3 big points. One, really to emphasize Nick's point, this is very iterative. This is going to be going to City Council at a study session for discussion and discussion on next steps. So we're continuing to move through this process, and we will welcome feedback. That's obviously the next step. We just wanted to get something on paper. I think from staff's perspective, that's the biggest key, is just having a starting point to have the discussion, which is where we're at now. Two, as Nick mentioned, and I really want to emphasize it, other cities have done similar projects. Sunnyvale, Burlingame, Davis is looking at one. The one thing that we have really learned from a lot of these cities is that they really wish that they did kind of a passive park space and it wasn't all just singular use, that this is a space that can be utilized in many different fashions in many different ways. And so meeting with those staffs has actually allowed us to make the best version that we could think of for the first concept, which this is. So we've taken a lot of those lessons learned and put those forward. And then my final point, I just wanted to touch on, I'm sorry, let me go ahead and I just want to touch on this just so, you know, as it is now in our downtown, we have at-grade parking with vehicles that are used. And then some of these are hot spots that don't move all day. What we're envisioning now is that those vehicles still have the potential to come to our downtown. So customers, employees still can come to downtown and park. They just park below grade. And now we have a beautiful park space that wouldn't be available anywhere else within our community, as Nick talked about, just because of the cost for per acquisition of land. So what we're talking about, and it really excites me as a staff member, and I think it incites a lot of folks, is the potential that we could transition from the at-grade vehicle parking where you're looking at vehicles all day to this park space with the vehicle parking just below grade. So we're still going to provide the same vehicular parking. We're just moving it below the ground. And this could be a beautiful amenity that could draw a number of individuals into our town and hopefully provide a ton of benefits for our business community, which is ultimately our goal. How we can create a vibrant, beautiful downtown. And quite frankly, we're happy to work on this project. We're excited to take this to City Council and get the next steps underway, which will include community outreach. So that's it for me, David.
Anthony and Nick, thanks so much for the great presentation and dialogue related to it. I'd like now to open this up to the attendees for questions. Please raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you in the order that the hands have been raised. And remember, please, one question per person and no speeches, please. Pete Daly's hand was up first.
Sorry, guys. I've had some intermittent internet connection. I just wanted to go back to the funding mechanism, and maybe Nick could chime in on this because I want to simplify it and boil it down. And it addresses the reason why we're choosing a more costly construction method to go underground. So there's actually two reasons to go underground. One is I think it's going to look a hell of a lot better. I park at Underhill when I go to football games at Berkeley. I've been familiar with that park over a parking structure for 30 years. It's not particularly beautiful and it wouldn't look very good in our downtown. A park at grade is going to be beautiful. But the real reason, Nick, maybe you can explain this, is the fungibility of park and lieu fees and our projected take of park and lieu fees. So if we build above ground, we can't use park and lieu fees for those levels of parking. And also, Nick, what do you think we're going to bring in over the 8-year housing element cycle for park in lieu fees?
Sure, thanks, Councilmember Daly. So what Pete is kind of referring to is, and I do want to just make sure that we do kind of orient the conversation is just so people know, is that if we did do an above ground parking structure, typical kind of like some of the ones you see in Palo Alto, for example, we wouldn't be able to really create a strong nexus to be able to use park and lieu funds to be able to do that. Now, the dropping it below grade, we have that nexus very strongly. Now, where we're talking about, so everyone knows, is our park and lieu rate for multifamily housing specifically is currently set at $48,800 per unit. So we're talking about essentially $50,000 a unit. Our housing element requires us to, as a city, not just in downtown, so I want to make sure that we're clear on that, is that throughout the city, we have to produce in just under a decade, or approve at least in just under a decade, just under 2,000 units. So if we're doing the rough math of let's round up on both 2,000 times 50,000, that's $100 million worth of park and lieu dollars. We would have to build a lot of solid gold slides throughout the city in order to expend that funds adequately. So we are going to see a trend of constant deposit into that account. And this would be a very good way for us to accomplish our park acquisition, which is what the intent is of that fund.
Thanks, Nick. Next in line is Katie Zoglin.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation and all the thought you've put into this. I just had a quick background question at the beginning of the presentation. You talked about why you chose lots 1 and 2, and I didn't hear why lots 7 and 8 were not appropriate for this project.
So parking plaza 7 and 8, actually during the downtown vision, the community scoped and planned for that to be affordable housing or just housing in general. So 7 and 8 have been kind of visioned for a good number of years to be a part of that component for downtown. And then the city did reaffirm that vision and idea by the community in our adopted housing element. So the city is currently developing our RFI, so a request for information, which mirrors very much what Palo Alto recently just did for their downtown parking lots. That they're going to be doing that's a very similar process to what we're doing. So we will be going through the process of doing a public-private partnership with Parking Plaza 7 and 8 to do affordable housing on those lots with then integration and replacement of some of the parking from those lots as well. So very similar, it's just instead of the above grade being a park, it would be above grade would be the affordable housing.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Janine, sorry about that. I didn't see your hand. It's pale and faded into the background, so I skipped you by accident. Janine Valdez.
Thanks. Sorry. Thank you. My question is about the alley, the waymaking. I'm sorry, the pedestrian activation, what you're calling number 9. In light of the fact that there is an ongoing initiative that hopefully will be expanded towards activating 3rd Street as an art district, is there potential for that plan for 9, for what you're calling 9, to be an activation that continues all the way to the other side of what might become the theater towards an art district on 3rd?
So I'll kind of jump in. I think what Anthony was going to say is that the rendering is really kind of specific to just taking and talking about the space specifically to the park component. Where I'll kind of jump in and say is, and the community can kind of look at it, is so the firm Opticoast, if you were to Google Opticoast Downtown Davis specific plan, you would be able to see on their website something very similar to this, but they did an entire specific plan, separate planning document for this. And it was essentially the same thing that we have, is we have the fronts of the buildings that have their backs to where all the parking is. And their downtown specific plan re-envisioned all of the parking to where you essentially have dual-sided buildings where your backs can turn to the front and the front to the back type of a situation, or have double frontages. So really, it's gonna, by creating this long linear park between all of these structures, we then also have the private potential for folks to want to essentially reorient and kind of create different spaces that really right now is all just service, kind of components of these businesses. So we really could see a vast improvement to what we all kind of look at as an alleyway and a drive area, to something that is more of passive and activated, pedestrian area and almost plaza-esque. That has, art deployments and kind of expansion and meandering of the park beyond just the traditional confines of what we're kind of looking at. So again, it's kind of iterative, and it would be kind of something that I think would, further evolve in the future years, because we're kind of creating this this one big amenity that's going to kind of spark the private improvements, very much like what we've continued to see in downtown.
Thanks, Nick. I know some of you may need to leave at 9:30. Nick and Anthony, I'm hoping you could stay for a few minutes after that to answer some more of the additional questions, if that'd be
Yes.
okay. That's
Yep.
great. Before anyone who has to leave at 9:30 goes, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Our next meeting will be on Friday, April 5th from 8:30 to 9:30. Please join us for a discussion around entitled Los Altos Chief of Police, an update and a farewell presented by Angela Everett. If you'd like to be added to the LACC mailing list, please send an email to info@losaltoscommunitycoalition.org. This email is posted in chat for your convenience. To keep informed about this and other plans and projects, you can sign up for email notifications for any or all of the city's emails and it's https www.losaltosca.gov/subscribe. This URL is posted in the chat also now for your convenience. A big thank you from the LACC steering committee to the Los Altos Mountain View Community Foundation for providing LACC with financial and in-kind support. Next question, Tom Ferry.
Hi, my question is about cost. I heard Nick say that the cost of underground parking is about $80K per spot. What is the estimated cost for the park? I've seen anywhere from $50 to $100 per square foot. Do you have an estimate for that?
So it really does depend on what the community, when we kind of go through the community visioning component. So I would say actually Sunnyvale's a really good example. If you actually kind of poked around on Google and saw what they did, is the garage cost such a chunk of money when they did it 10 years ago. And then they kind of, obviously we know downtown Sunnyvale, it kind of, because of the 2007 recession, it kind of really, faded down with what they were seeing as reinvestment in the area from the private development side of things. So when the parking garage that's right at the corner, right across the street from the Caltrans stop, there was a bigger improvement that was planned for the above ground, what is now like a plaza area initially. And so they had to do an iterative process of that. They did it for essentially the bare bones originally just over a decade ago, and then have slowly integrated some additional improvements and actually are planning on doing even further in the future. So I really, it's really hard. I think your kind of range is kind of spot on from what we know as well. And it really just depends on, what improvements, folks are looking to have on the structure. Obviously, if people really wanted to, be able to have, a drive aisle through, the middle of a park, obviously, I don't think anybody wants that, but that would obviously lower a lot of the amenities, so to speak, of the park site. So we just have to kind of look at it as essentially what amenities are, desired. And some of them might be things that can kind of come in phases, if it's certain above ground facilities, and not just the flat work, or so to speak, concrete or, landscaping. And we just pre-plumb it, and then we then build the rest of it when we, have a little bit more dollars or community desire or specifics on it. So I will say, it really is a pretty big range depending on what you want to do. Some people get really stellar with some of their park designs and what they want to put on it. And others really just have it very passive and very singular use, which is what we've seen, specifically in some of our nearby jurisdictions of what they've done. So I would say we can probably get better numbers when we kind of see what the community at large kind of says, hey, these are the amenities that we would like to see integrated.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Lou Cardilano.
Yes, thank you. Since Nick is here, I wonder if we could talk about priorities. You mentioned parking lot 7 and 8 and affordable housing. What's been in the news and on my mind a lot is affordable housing and more housing in Los Altos. And I'm wondering if you could shed some light on what are the priorities? What will come sooner? Affordable housing on 7 and 8 or this park on 1 and 2?
Sure. So I really think that that's going to be really dependent on when we go later this year with our RFI and RFP for Plaza 7 and 8. 100% affordable housing developments do take time and do take a lot of money to make those happen. And it does really take some finessing, and I would say, you know, our 330 Distal project, which was 100% affordable just off of El Camino Real and Distal Circle, they were approved or entitled in September of 22. So we're gonna be coming up pretty quickly in 6 more months from 2 years. So realistically, you know, if it's a 100% affordable project, which I know the city really hopes that we can get something again like that to be able to really make an impact for the affected population as well as, you know, a community benefit. But the numbers are really difficult right now for affordable housing developers to do the 100% affordable projects. So we might have a blend of a developer. And so when those happen generally a little bit faster because they need to get the return as quick as possible because of the note that they're carrying from their lenders, essentially. So it really just depends. Obviously, government, we don't move fast when it comes to our own projects. But I do think that there is an appetite to, one, obviously make improvements to the surface lots that we do know are in need of some TLC. And it would be better to re-envision and not, you know, pour in several hundreds of thousands of dollars to surface lots that we might then dig up in, you know, 4 to 5 years from now. So I really can't speak to which one I think will come first. I think it really depends on the market. You know, as we've all seen from the federal level, is that the interest rates have been coming down. However, then we have, you know, federal and state budgets that are kind of very much in flux right now. So that's going to depend very heavily for the housing development. So until I see a little bit better of, you know, the market trend in that, I think right now we're probably trending at this park happening first, in my professional opinion, but that's also dependent on what happens in the market. And so I think we'll know a little bit more later this year about that.
Thanks, Nick. Gary Hedden.
Hello, it's very exciting. I especially like the event space. I think it's going to be important to have more than just an open grassy area, have other things to activate the space. My concern or question is about neighborhood parks. Key component of walkable of a strong neighborhood is to have walkable parks within reach. And will this starve some of the funding for local building more neighborhood parks? There are parts of Los Altos that could use a neighborhood park, and also just the maintenance and upkeep of the existing parks. Thank you.
So the maintenance and upkeep, you know, I think that's something that's really on the Park and Rec director's list. He has a very robust number of CIPs for this fiscal year, and that will get finished, you know, in the next fiscal year already for kind of the maintenance and improvements to those existing facilities. In regards to additional, you know, park deployments and everything, I think, you know, this could be a catalyst to, you know, look at how we envision and spend our park and lieu dollars on some of the sites that we can actually deploy, that we already have ownership over, and re-envision what they're being used for and how they're, you know, already, you know, designed. in the future. But I think that, you know, a big project like this is something that can get a lot of people excited about what we can do and what we can envision elsewhere, you know, not just specific to downtown, but throughout the community.
Thank you.
Larry Lang.
You can skip me. Gary hadn't essentially asked the question that I was curious about. So thank you, Gary, and thanks for the good answer.
Sorry,
Uh,
Larry.
And I wanted to just, there was one comment that Margaret Delane made from the chat. For the central green and seating area, we might consider elegant sun shading methods. So I just wanted to posit that as a question.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something that we can, you know, factor in as a part of the community visioning process. And, you know, when we work specifically kind of with the park landscape designer, that they would kind of try to take that all into account. Also, depending upon what type of trees are selected, sometimes you actually don't need structures in the artificial creation of shade. So it really just does depend on how we kind of do that. I think one of the things that, you know, we recently, you know, have moved forward with was, you know, shade type structures over some of our park facilities in the city. And that was something that Manny Hernandez, you know, brought forward last year. And so those are kind of, I would say, accessory, like almost like what you do with vehicles is like an aftermarket addition, where we don't necessarily have to do that all right up front, because sometimes it's like, let's see how the space actually works once it's built and constructed. So as long as we make sure we, you know, over engineer the garage that we're going to be, you know, having a park on top of it, then we can always make some of those accessory improvements if it's not something that we do right away, so that we see how the trees mature and provide us the shade, you know, so on and so forth. So I think it's definitely something that we can try to accomplish up front, or it's something the community might want to see what we can do first with the trees and, you know, kind of that component, you know, through the natural landscape of what we can, you know, actually build out. But again, that's a lot of it's going to go through the community visioning process of how we can design and perfect it so that it's kind of highest and best use for the design.
Janine.
Quick question, following up on the idea of the nexus that you described for having parkland above a parking structure, which, you know, brings all kinds of benefits and synergies. Can you extend, is it possible to extend that analogy or that nexus concept to park usage on atop a parking structure that is part underground, but also part above ground? Can PIL funds be used for that kind of scenario?
It could, and it would be something that we would just have to really look at a little bit more, you know, with a specific type of a fine-tooth lens, essentially. The only thing that I would say that just from like a community planner perspective is obviously something that's at grade activates the pedestrian aspect. So it doesn't kind of create a difference in elevation, obviously, from what is existing today and proposed in the future immediately adjacent, and then somewhat of a raised platform that almost creates a new structure in and of itself. So it kind of creates almost like a real vertical delineation between existing and proposed spaces. I would say my professional preference and opinion would be to say an at-grade one would be the best way to be able to kind of create the most activation possible in the immediate area. But there might be some of the other areas in town that we might want to do something like you're referencing, Janine. And so I wouldn't say that I think this proposal is the only way to do it. And, you know, potentially when we go to actually working with like the structural engineer to do the design of the actual below grade work, they might say, hey, you really should consider, because of, I don't know, let's say stormwater or whatever, you know, components that we have to take into account. You might want to factor in having, you know, a 2-foot, you know, lip almost that is above grade, where you almost have a little bit of a raised platform, but then we could taper it off when you get to the street sides of everything where, you know, you're really not going to know it unless you're kind of immediately adjacent to it in the alleyway. You know, I could see maybe that being, you know, something we have to consider as a part of the recommendation. So I think it's really something that, you know, it's still up in, you know, flow with the design. And we could still use park and lieu funds, but not for going to like what I know some community members have said is, oh, well, let's do like a 4-story structure and a park on top. The nexus in proportionality, it really more so looks like, okay, you're just using those dollars to build that garage. And there's also the safety component as well as, you know, do we really want to have people on top of a 4-story building for, you know, full active park? There goes to the security aspect of it as well. If something's about like at grade, you know, our police department is obviously, as well as fire, going to readily be able to know and see when things are occurring from a safety component. You know, moving forward in the future versus not being able to have their eyes on something, you know, 4 stories above grade. So I think those are all things that we'll have to consider when we move forward with the ultimate design.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you once again, Nick and Anthony, for a great discussion today of this important project.
Sure, thank you.
And thanks everyone for attending. We'll look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks.